Good evening and welcome to a Magpie Circle live show with a little bit of a difference tonight. We're going to wind back the clock, the best part of 12 years to one of arguably, probably not even arguably, the most momentous seasons in the history of Notts County Football Club, the Munto season. Sven-Göran Eriksson, the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, Formula One, and the one and only Russell King. All will be revealed. There's a new BBC documentary series on podcast, 6 episodes that became available in full for the first time today. We've got the series producer and a Notts County fan to boot, Ben Robinson, to talk to us about all things about the podcast this evening. Ben, very warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's a great pleasure, and look forward to chatting all things Notts County and Russell King.
The pleasure is all ours, and one of the very few people that actually had a conversation with Russell King, because he was a bit of an elusive character, and given his size and stature, I think you did well to even be in the same room as him when you're having the conversation. Les Brad, welcome, Les, and you got up close and personal with Russell King.
Yeah, well, hi Paul, hi Ben. Yes, I wasn't working at the club at the time. I was working over at Forest, and I was over at the match as a guest of the boardroom, and I was out on the balcony with Mr. King, and he was describing all the things that he was going to do to the club, and he pointed his finger over the top of the county road stand, and he said, over there is a huge cattle market at the moment. Well, I'm taking ownership of that. I'm going to knock it all down and put some big hotels up there. He had great ambitions, certainly that he was telling everybody that was about to happen with his takeover, and also Notts County Football Club.
Okay, well, we will be having a deep dive into that whole Munto season. Ben can give you, or will be giving us, the background behind that story about how he tracked down Sven, and a little bit of a twist in the tail in the 6th and final part. Did what I was unable to do, and that was to actually get hold of the aforementioned Russell King. Don't want to give too much away, but I do know several of you have already gone through all the episodes. Charfita has just come on the chat. Listen to all the episodes today. Top job, Ben and the BBC. Thought I got rid of your voice until tonight, though, Paul. Yeah, I pop up everywhere. You should know that by now. I was apparently, I've not had a chance to listen to myself. I do feature in 1 or 2 of the episodes. Also tonight, news of the Magpie Circle producer, aka my son, Harry, who is going to be walking on a sponsored walk from Notts County to Chesterfield next Tuesday. It's 28 miles if you don't get lost, which means he'll probably walk about 57 before he finally gets to the Technique Stadium, or whatever Chesterfield's new stadium is called, we hope before kickoff. He's doing that to raise funds for Lifeline and the memory of Colin Slater. There is a Just Giving page with details you can see. If some of our flock, or a decent percentage of it, can just donate a £5, don't want much, just a £5, and let's see if we can get £500 to go into the coffers of Lifeline. Lynn Lawson runs an excellent ship there, and of course Colin was instrumental in launching Lifeline 26 years ago. Les, I think you were around at that time as well. So hopefully we can raise a bit of money for Lifeline and all the good things they do for Notts County. Will you be joining my lad for any of the 29 miles, i.e. all of them?
I'd love to say yes, but I've received a letter recently that is calling me in to meet up with a surgeon that's going to provide a knee replacement. So I'm not quite sure I'm up to that. I do plenty of walking currently, but that's probably a little bit too far for me, Paul.
All right, well, you'll see more details of that in the coming few days, but 29 miles walk to Chesterfield next Tuesday for the game. Let's hope it's not postponed. You certainly wouldn't be doing it to Dover. A, you wouldn't get that far, and B, you don't want it. If you're going to walk any length of distance, you don't want it being postponed, do you? Right, okay. Ben, let's talk the Munto season. Let's get your credentials first. So you are a Notts County fan, aren't you? Just give us a bit of background.
Yes, I am. For my sins, yeah, I'm a lifelong Notts fan. My dad, it's a family affair, basically. My dad was a Notts fan, and most of my sort of close family, my uncles, my cousins, that sort of thing. So, it was drummed into me, from a very young age at family parties and things that there's really no other option. You can forget about the other side of the Trent or anything more glamorous elsewhere. It had to be. It had to be Notts County, yeah. So we were talking before. I went to school in Calverton, and there was a smattering, I'd say, of Notts County fans. We were very much in the minority, so we had to stick together. But yeah, so it's.
What was your generation when you were a young lad? Because to be fair, you say a smattering. By Notts County standards, Calverton's a stronghold. Now, I believe. Radi Avramovich used to live there. I believe, Les, was Steve Carter a Calverton lad as well in his day?
I can't answer that, obviously.
Yeah, I think he was. I think he was at Calverton way. So what era did you grow up in? When you were growing up, who were your childhood heroes, Ben?
Well, my first Notts game was Manchester United at home in the old First Division. That 1-1 draw when Tommy Johnson scored. Yeah. I mean, clearly it's pretty much been downhill ever since. But that was the real sort of, well, that was the start of it. I mean, other seasons I've got really strong memories of. Obviously the Sam Allardyce promotion season, and then beyond that, it really is this Munto season that we're talking about tonight. There are a few sort of highlights, and this one certainly stands out above them all, I'd say.
Okay, so you're with. So give us some background as to how this documentary came about. You work with the BBC. Was this something you suggested? I mean, how did it all come to fruition?
Well, I mean, it's strange, really, because I think probably with me, like all Notts fans, this story is it's sort of somewhere in your subconscious. It must always be there somewhere. If you meet somebody new and you mention you're a Notts fan, there's always a sort of trigger. Didn't you have Sven and Sol Campbell and all that? It's always there. And we had an opportunity basically to pitch for this strand, the Sport's Strangest Crimes. It came up, and that trigger was there. It was almost instantaneously. It's like, well, I have the Sport's Strangest Crime, and it involves Notts County. It didn't even take thinking about when we were invited to pitch for this particular series. It was all right there, and it sort of it fell into place. I must have had the story kicking around somewhere and waiting for the opportunity. So there it was.
Now, I have to say, there's a huge amount of research gone into this in terms of tracking people down, speaking to all sorts of different people, connected with a quite unbelievable storyline. I remember meeting you at, I think we met, it's during COVID at its height, wasn't it? We met in the BBC Radio Nottingham studio. So, just talk to me about the number of man hours research, where it's taken you, how much work has gone into bringing this to fruition.
Oh, blimey. Well, it just got bigger and bigger as the weeks and months went by. I started off with the story of Notts County and Munto and Sven and, the sort of story that all Notts fans are familiar with. But the more we started digging into Russell King in particular, the more the story got bigger and it expanded, across the world. And you sort of come to realise that Notts County were just one of, a number of victims, a number of cases, if you like, that have spread decades and all over the world. So the story took us. We delved right back into his business and criminal past. Right back to the 1980s, we looked at his early business dealings. He had a great amount of time in Jersey. There's a lot of fascinating and things happened there. So I thought I was pitching one story, and I ended up with 3, 4, 5, other stories, and it was a hell of a piece of work to try and pull it all together.
Pleased with what you've been able to get?
Well, I think it comes to a point when you can't really tell. You lose all. Today's been it's been sort of a nerve-wracking day, really. It's been released. I, along with the editor Carl and Nick, another producer who worked alongside me with it, and the sound designer Paul, we've all been working on it for flat out for months, and we all thought we're proud of what we've done, and we think it's a really good story, but you can never quite tell how it will go down when it's been released. So there seems to have been some good early feedback. It seems to have gone down well today, but I suppose time will tell how people take to it. I think we're really keen to emphasise that it isn't just a story for football fans. It's a story that involves a football club, but there's so much more to it and so much more going on. In this story that hopefully there's something that will appeal to everybody.
I think you're doing a fantastic piece of work, and all the episodes went live this morning, and the Notts County family, the Magpie Circle family, Andrew Briggs, who's a massive follower of us, he's dropped me a note on Facebook to say he's already watched all 6 episodes, and I mentioned that name to you, and what did you say?
Yeah, well, Briggsy, we were both at school together at Frank Seeley in Calverton. So, we were 2 of the smattering of Notts fans that had to stick together. So he contacted me on Twitter as well. It's fantastic to hear that he'd listened to them all. That was great, and sort of lovely to hear an old name as well. I haven't seen him for donkey's years, and so it's bringing us back together.
Yeah, well, he spent 3 hours of his day and more already watching every and listening to every second of the podcast. Les, if I can bring you in, you dipped out. Hopefully you can hear me at the moment.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Let's just wind back the clock. Where were you when you heard that Sven-Göran Eriksson was coming to Notts County, and did you not believe it until there was that famous press conference and Sven was there?
Well, before I forget, I must bring comment to your book, which is probably 5 years ago since I got a copy and read through, but the chapter on the Munto era, I think I read that probably 6 times. I read it and went back again, read it again and went back again. I just could not believe that could happen, but it did happen. And you've asked me where I was. I'd sort of left Forest by this time. I'd sort of gone back to Notts to work, and I'd moved on and gone to work with a sponsor of Notts County. You'll remember the name Joy Sharp of Hillside Medical Supplies, and she was sponsoring quite a number of games in those days. So I was heavily involved around the club. And when the news came through, it was just like, no, this can't happen to Notts County. Notts County isn't a club that this happens with, and Sven-Göran Eriksson coming in, who I met and had photographs with and talked to, and thought, wow, it just didn't seem right. It wasn't right for Notts County Football Club.
Did you pinch yourself? So remember back to the first time you shook hands with Sven, and did Sven go, Leslie Brad? you are the club's record goal scorer, or did he say, who are you? Or, I mean, did you say, I am the club? You wouldn't say, I am the club's record scorer, I know. But was it kind of one of those surreal moments? Because professional footballers are quite cynical, aren't they? We've seen it all that sort of thing. What was that like, shaking hands with Sven and thinking, crikey, I've only ever seen him on the telly managing England and everything else?
Yeah. Well, it was on a match day, and he'd come along to shake hands with Joy Sharp, the sponsor, thanking her. And he was introduced to me. Can't remember who it was, the club official that did that. And it was no big deal about me. It was more about him and Notts County Football Club and how the club were going to move forward. That's what sticks in my mind, and he impressed me greatly about his thoughts on how he was going to achieve that. You know, I admired him to come in, and he became a big favourite with a lot of people down at the club every Sunday morning. He went to watch the youngsters playing and met with the parents, and I just went away from that meeting going, wow, what is the next for Notts County? It was just incredible.
Okay, Ben. So, Sven, Matt Scott, the Guardian journalist, who I know you've spoken to for the show, for the series. Matt, I thought, described it very well to me when he said Sven was kind of the glue which stuck it all together. Without Sven, it was purely, inverted commas, a mirage. Yeah, Sven gave it some substance to see the figure of Sven at a press conference, Sven at Notts County matches, home and away. Clearly an integral part. And I think, you know, you had to jump through a few hoops to get him, didn't you? Give us a bit of a background of how you got Sven, where you spoke to him, and kind of how he spoke to you guys for the podcast.
Yeah, well, you're quite right, and I remember it, obviously, myself as a fan at the time. You know, when Sven arrived, it took what was, you know, potentially a sort of more interesting season than it had been into something completely different, and it pulled everybody together, didn't it? As every fan, everybody was suddenly signed up because here's Sven. He's a physical embodiment of our dream of that things are happening, that the money's there, and you know, everybody went along with it. I think from that moment, so it was, you know, obviously really crucial that we did all we could to get him in the series. And as you allude to, it took months and months really of haranguing, I suppose you'd call it, his agents who were you know, really helpful, I should say. But you know, he was a difficult person to pin down, to get to agree. He had other contractual agreements that he'd signed up to, those sorts of things. We had to wade through all sorts of red tape and setbacks and other things until eventually we managed to get to the man himself. And you know, very much worth the wait. He was an absolute you know, gentleman to deal with. It was a real sort of pleasure to speak to him, and you know, there was no question he tried to sort of shirk, or you know, he was just very open with everything, which you know, really helped. We had hoped to get over and see him in person, but he lives in a very rural outcrop somewhere in Sweden. So no matter what we looked at, what we tried, whether we could get him to an airport, we could fly in, we tried everything. But in the end, we had to settle with speaking to him down the line, as we call it. He was on the phone, and we were in the studio. And as some people have heard, even that wasn't entirely smooth. I was having all sorts of technical difficulties trying to get his line set up. But eventually we did get there, and it was I think it was well worth the effort. As I say, he gave us some fascinating insights and was really generous with his time, and you know, it was a really interesting interview.
I think the three of us, you can see on the screen now, we've all been very fortunate to speak and engage with Sven. And I think one of the things that everybody says when they speak to Sven, Les, is he's like your cuddly uncle. There is no airs, no grace. You would never believe that this is a former England manager. This is a manager who's managed some of the biggest clubs in the world, one of the most recognisable football figures in the world. But there is just no edge to him at all, is there?
Well, that was certainly my experience of the occasions when I was in his company, my two sons in this company. He made you feel completely relaxed to talk and share anything with him. And I don't know whether I'm right in saying this, but I believed he had a very good and lengthy contract with Notts County Football Club. And when it came to the breakup of the agreement that was going on with Munto, he could have tried or taken the club for a lot of money, and I believe he walked away without putting the club under any issues with money, and became a life president. I think he was given that honour because of what he did. Would I be right in saying that?
Certainly, I had a bit of that conversation. I'm not listened to Sven's piece on Ben's podcast series yet. But yes, he told me that he had waived all his contractual rights on a pretty substantial contract, and walked away. And I believe the same applied to Hans Backer, if you remember, who was his appointment as manager. I saw Hans in Finland about 2 years later. And he said, yes, he said, when I left, he said, I realised it wasn't right. The club didn't have any money. He said, when I left, he said, I just said, don't pay me anything. I will just go. So, yeah, I mean, fair play.
Absolutely.
He didn't have to do that. A lot of people would say, well, that's the thing that he should do. But it's not always the way in football where fixed term contracts are handed out. Okay, so that's kind of Sven. Ben, the figure who only ever described himself as a consultant, but whoever you speak to would say he acted very differently to being a consultant. He issued the orders. One Russell King. Having investigated this, what was the mass? Can you kind of, because no matter how many times we talk about this, and I had to go in my book, there are so many layers. Can you distill what was Russell King doing here?
Cool, blimey. Well, we've spent 6 episodes trying to explain it, so I'll try my best to distill it down. But it seems that, and this is going to sound obviously very bizarre out of context, but it appears that he used Notts County. He wanted Notts County to create a buzz, some excitement, some pizzazz around a planned stock market listing of a company he also sort of controlled, called Swiss Commodity Holding, which had the rights, incredibly, to mine all of North Korea's natural mineral resources, gold, coal, you name it. Now, I mean, it sounds ridiculous just saying it, but, he had this company which he was trying to claim was, the most valuable, the biggest mining company in the world, but nobody had ever heard of it. It had only been created a short time before. We know that the process was ongoing to try to get this company listed on the stock exchange. It hadn't happened, but he needed something to point to, something credible, something where they could say, look, we have this. This is a club going somewhere. It's got our branding on it. It adds that a real veneer of respectability. You've got great figureheads like Sven there. It's something to point to, and that seems to be the grand aim of the whole thing. The stock market listing of this mining company was the end game rather than Notts County itself.
So Notts County was a small cog in a very, very, well, it was a global fraud, would you say?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it stretches from Bahrain to to Jersey to Meadow Lane to North Korea. You know, there are tentacles of this absolutely everywhere. And you know, if you look over the much longer period, say, of his criminal career, if you like, Notts County were a small victim. You know, in terms of what they lost and the repercussions, they're just the most high profile. And you know, unlike a normal business, for example, there are thousands of people who feel they've got a stake in a football club, so it affects a great many more people. And of course, it brought in people like Sven-Göran Eriksson. So yeah, really, Notts County were a relatively small part of a much bigger conspiracy.
And of course, Sven, unwittingly, Notts County may have been a pawn on a chessboard. Sven was kind of more like, you know, a rook or something like that. He was up because of his status. He was a higher ranking player, wasn't he? And he was paraded and used. And of course, there is the great story that Sven has spoken about to me, and I'm sure to you, about how he had to go to North Korea as part of Russell King's delegation to sign this piece of paper saying they've got global mineral rights. And well, Russell King, no one really knows who he is other than the big fat bloke signing a piece of paper. In North Korea, even, Sven is like royalty.
Yes, quite. And I mean, we've spoken to experts on North Korea, sort of expert commentators on North Korea, and they tell us that, you know, it's a particularly clever strategy to take, you know, a sports figure, a global sports figure, into North Korea. It opens so many doors because it's of great propaganda value to the North Koreans. They can you know, put the person on state TV, show their country what an important country they are to be able to attract these people. So, you know, it was a very smart move, it would appear, to take him there, and clearly did the job. And of course, Sven tells this incredible story while he's there, that he was asked by a certain official that if he could fix North Korea with a good group in the World Cup. You might remember North Korea had just qualified for their first ever World Cup, and Sven was on the FIFA committee at the time, and just sort of couldn't believe what they were asking him. You know, he described it so well to us, he almost sort of did a double take and was having a hard time convincing them that he couldn't do that and it was illegal. He got the feeling that they thought he just didn't want to. You know, it's just remarkable, really. But yes, it was what appears to be a very smart and well-planned move to take someone like that over there.
I remember also when I was speaking to Sven for the book, and he relates a kind of a supplementary to the whole North Korea. The only way you can get in and out of North Korea apparently is via Beijing on a flight. And so Sven says they're in Pyeongchang airport or whatever, having had the meeting, it's all gone very well. And they're in some very small little VIP room. And Russell King all of a sudden is getting really upset and worked up and up, walking up and down the room, and it appears there's a problem with them being allowed to board the little plane that goes back to Beijing. And Sven asks the female attendant there, you know, is there a problem? And in her pidgin English, she's gone, well, you will be all right to get on the plane, but I'm not sure about your friends. And so at this point, obviously Russell is thinking, right, you know, game might be up here. And it's one thing to be a fraudster, right? It's another to be caught, and it's another to be caught in North Korea, isn't it? So he is clearly petrified, or other similar phrases. And apparently it was like about half an hour where Sven said he'd never seen a man look more worried or scared before he was finally given permission to get on the plane. And I believe he was given permission to get on the plane because he was operating, according to Matt Scott, all these, ridiculous detail we go into, because he was operating, as I understand it, on a Bahraini diplomatic passport. He'd done some dodgy deal in Bahrain, and they'd given him like a diplomatic immunity passport so he could like wander through. And apparently that was how he managed to get out. Les, you met Russell King, because this is the big debate, isn't it? There are people now that say, oh, we knew from day one it was a con. The guarantee wasn't worth the paper it was written on. I said that, I said this, etc., etc., etc. And it has been proven that Russell King, as Ben in his series is obviously showing, is a serial fraudster. When you met him, and you would see Peter Tremling and was it Nathan and Peter Willett, as a professional footballer, a good judge of character, for the first month or so, did you think everything was the real deal, or did you have reservations all along?
Well, as a Notts County supporter, you're always a bit wary. These sort of things don't happen to Notts County Football Club. So, yes, to begin with, yes. But when it came into fruition, I went, wow, with Sven. And I think probably my first doubts, worries came in after we signed the centre-half.
Sol Campbell,
the episode up at Morecambe. I'm thinking something not right here, and then it all quickly unfolded, didn't it? Then, and I thought there's something drastically wrong. That was probably the first time it ever entered my head. Before that, why, Sven's in, he's there working. Why did you have any reason to think this wasn't right? I'd met Sven. He talked about what was going to happen with the club, and everything seemed, for me, ready to go. The club could only move forward. So just a huge shock when it all turned upside down. And don't forget, also Russell King was very nearly into Formula One in a big way as well, wasn't he? Mm-hmm. We haven't mentioned that, but that was part of the big package as well that he was trying to get involved.
One person you've interviewed, Ben, and I think it's fair to say that he is quite a polarising figure in the recent history of Notts County, is the former... Hey, here goes the cuckoo clock. Must be 7:30. 2 minutes late, Les. Cuckoo clocks. Great lead into John Armstrong-Holmes. So John Armstrong-Holmes is quite a polarising figure. I think it's fair to say he was fairly sceptical of the trust in its first enactment, but was quite happy to become chairman of the club when it presented an opportunity to him. Ben, what did you... Very few people have heard from John for a long period of time. What did you make, or what was John's view in terms of having been custodian at that time, flying out there? It must have been quite challenging, because clearly the trust were having financial difficulties moving forward of operating a club. Any given season, it is difficult for a trust to operate a professional football club in terms of balancing the books. For my money, whatever you would say about John is Russell King has duped far, far greater minds than John, being brutally honest. What was your take on John's piece for you?
Well, I mean, he talked us through what were, if you take a step back and think just an incredible set of circumstances, you're approached. He was approached by Peter Trembling, and he talked us through this scenario that moved really very quickly. They're out in Bahrain before they knew it, negotiating on what they thought was going to be the biggest deal Notts County had ever done. And he's a Notts County supporter, and I certainly got the strong impression that he thought he was doing what was best for the club, that the deal checked out, that everything seemed good and above board, and they'd gone through those due diligence processes that they had to, and that this was the right thing. As you allude to, this is someone who's planned frauds and schemes and incredibly complex, multi-layered frauds over huge periods of time. It's only with retrospect we can see really how flawed this was from the start. But at that moment, I think he felt that he was doing the best thing for a football club he supports. And we come back to him later on, because once this whole thing has fallen to pieces, he seems to play a role in recruiting Ray Trew to come and take over. He feels a sense of duty to the club, having sold to Munto, to try and rescue the situation a bit. And so there's a meeting between him and Ray Trew at a Beefeater pub outside Newark, where he gives to Ray Trew the best of his knowledge of what the state of the club is at that time, and then that goes from there very quickly as well. That Ray Trew then has to make a quick decision before the next winding up hearing in the High Court. So there's two parts to his story really. But I think that's how I describe it really.
I guess if there was one person who was always very skeptical, and he actually received death threats from Notts County fans via, anonymously via social media message boards and all of that sort of ridiculous stuff when people become emboldened by anonymity. So he took a lot of flack. But Matt Scott from The Guardian, the Digger column, he wrote a whole series of articles. And I think he described it to me as probably the best piece of journalistic work he'd ever done in ultimately unmasking Russell King. Because, let's be honest, no one really had pieced all of this together. Matt was the first. Matt was, if you like, the cynic throughout, and he was proved right. You spoke extensively with Matt. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it'd be fair to say Matt did more than anyone else to bring what happened to a halt, to try and dig into it all and get to the bottom of it. Matt was flying all over the world, meeting sources, getting documents. It was him that did the real hard yards in it. And as you say, he was cynical, I suppose, or questioning from the start. Things didn't add up. It was I think he wrote a brief bit in his column about there being a delay to approving the fit and proper persons test, and he describes how he saw himself as a sort of custodian of football clubs, of these sort of community assets, and he got a tip off them from a colleague saying, from a source saying, there's more to this. You need to keep digging, and so he did, and it took him on this incredible journey of discovering what was going on behind the scenes. And it was far darker, far more intricate, deep-seated than he would have thought when he got that first call. So he did some incredible work on it. There's somebody else that we've got in the podcast as well, Simon Goodley, who is an investigative journalist at The Guardian, and he's there now. But back then he'd been in financial journalism and was looking to for a career change, and he'd had a tip that Notts County were looking for a sort of head of press or a press officer. And he's one of those few people that had been very cynical from the start about this Munto takeover, he thought it made no sense at all. To have the involvement of the First London Bank and this bank guarantee. As someone who knows about the financial world, it just didn't add up for him. And he'd started doing digging of his own and discovered that Russell King was in the background running the thing. And as he put it to me, that he'd seen this man's name nowhere. So decided to go along for a job interview at Notts County, not with any intention of ever taking the job, but just to try a route around and see what he could find. And to his amazement, he was actually interviewed by Russell King for the job, which told him firstly that Russell King was running the show, and two that that he had to do something. Basically, he realised at that moment that his club was being run by a fraudster, and he started working on the story, and it eventually came out in the Sun, that big exclusive that you might remember that outed Russell King as the man at the centre of Notts County who was a convicted fraudster. And that was one of those real landmark moments when you're looking back on it, that it was the first sort of chink in the armour, the first sort of sign that things weren't right. That story, and that was thanks to Simon Goodley's efforts. So those two journalists really did play a huge role in unmasking Russell King and everything he was doing.
Another name we've not mentioned yet, Peter Trembling, who was I think a pretty central figure to all of this. He was installed as, I think his role was executive chairman. So effectively was calling the shots on a day-to-day basis from out of the club. And when the fraud mask started to slip, he ended up buying the club for £1 and tried to keep it going in conjunction with Sven before Ray Trew ended up buying the club. Did you manage to get much out of Peter, archive or current or otherwise?
Well, we spoke to Peter Trembling. I spoke to him at length. He didn't want to appear in the series, but as you allude to, he was interviewed extensively, at the time, particularly when it was announced and as things sort of started to fall to bits. So there is archive of him in there. And just to pick up on the point you make at the end there, I mean, we spoke to Sven about that time when Peter Trembling had taken over the club and was trying to pay players, pay staff out of his own pocket. Him and Sven were sort of heading all over Europe trying to find funding, meetings here, there, and everywhere, desperately trying to find enough money to keep this dream alive, keep Sven at the club. But it came to nothing. But yeah, there was a period there where the two of them were out on the road together, desperately hunting money.
Les, we've talked almost exclusively about off the pitch finances. As a former Notts player, as the club's record goal scorer, and please send in your thoughts, memories of that season on our message boards now, of what you recall of that season. For many people, it is the most exciting and best season they have ever experienced in their lifetime watching Notts County. Certainly, I would say, if you were born after 1991-92 and you just missed the Sam Allardyce championship season, then that is as good as it has got. And boy, was it good. And I'm guessing you would appreciate Lee Hughes more than most as a fantastic talismanic figure and what a wonderful goal scorer.
Lee was a Premiership striker that had come down to play for Notts County. He was probably also sold the dream that we've just been talking about, joining a club that was probably going to move forward and play at the top level of football. He was a joy to watch, wasn't he? The goals he scored during that season. Was it a hat-trick in his first game? Was it against Bradford? Was that 5-1 the first match, which kick-started the season and got everybody on board? And, and then other players came in. That I don't think we started particularly brilliantly, but we sort of moved on, and then
Casper in goal was obviously an iconic figure for the club.
Absolutely. And his father used to come to the matches, so sitting in the director's box, it was just an incredible time. And then it's kicked on in the latter part of the seasons with Steve Cottrell in charge, and it was wonderful how they managed to get into the first place, and then the win up at Darlington that ensured promotion, and it was a joyous occasion. And if it hadn't have been for the Munto episode, I don't think promotion would have happened. So there was some good that did come out of the deal.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Les, because I would wholeheartedly agree with you. The irony is that Notts never broke a single rule, and there was a lot of animosity towards Notts at the time, wasn't it? Fake this, fake that, Ben. But the reality was, thanks to Ray buying the club when he did, Notts never broke a rule.
Okay.
People ultimately. The club didn't go into administration, which people kind of like think, oh, yeah, he ended up, shortchanging people. And there's the great interview with Sven about, we couldn't pay the milk bill. But as a result of Ray taking over, payment plans and all the rest of it were agreed with people, and Sven waiving his contract. So in a funny way, not one single rule was actually broken by the club in the way that they achieved promotion.
No, and to pick up on you mentioned Ray Trew there. I mean, as you say, no rules were broken, but he was a man who had to pick up the excesses of Russell King's disastrous time in charge. I was absolutely fascinated speaking to him. He came in at very short notice. There wasn't time to do the full due diligence he'd have liked to have done. So he just had to sort of take a punt almost. And it was only after they'd taken over, they were due in court. This was obviously February 2010. They were due in court straight after the takeover. They had a huge tax bill to pay, which he paid. And then it's only in the sort of days and weeks afterwards that he started realizing what he got himself into. He was finding the flights to Bahrain. He was paying for those. He was paying for Sven's apartment. He was paying huge amounts of money for single appearances by Sol Campbell, for example. Sven's chauffeur. There's all of these bills. Every time he picked up the phone, it was somebody else wanting money. And as you say, Notts didn't break any rules, and they legitimately went on to win the league. But it all fell on him to have to deal with very, very, very quickly. And I mean, he didn't know what he was getting himself into. He says that himself. But there came a point, I think, where he had to decide: do I put this club into administration? Do I stop these debts or try and get them under control? But by that stage, you become a fan, as he puts it. Notts were hammering people every week. The fans were delirious still. They were still dreaming. We were still dreaming. So he couldn't do it. So he paid the bills and went along for the ride. And we don't use it actually in the podcast, but he sort of he alluded to the fact that he became known for sacking so many managers, which became a sort of a hallmark of his tenure. And he says he sort of became spoilt a little bit by that season, because they were doing so well, and just steamrolling teams. And it would be a real surprise if they went and drew. They lost one game, I think, in that incredible run during the season, maybe drew one as well. So at the start of the next season, Notts weren't doing that. We were losing games. We're up in League One and struggling a bit. And he did say to me that of all the sackings, he really regretted Craig Short of all of them, and he wanted to apologise to him because he felt he didn't give him the time he deserved, and he said he's an absolute gentleman, a brilliant man to work with, and he was too impatient with him. But it's because of that incredible run at the end of the season that sort of came about. And as I say, it wasn't, we didn't use it in the podcast, but as a Notts fan, I found that really interesting.
Yeah. Andrew Blatherwick says it was fun while it lasted, as in the season. Totally unsustainable without the money to bankroll the dream. CVAs are part and parcel of business, and many football clubs use that loophole to manage finances, I'm sure. Chris Gosling made the decision not to go into administration the week after we lost to Fulham in the FA Cup 5th round, if I remember rightly. I think there's a lot of conjecture about buying a club, putting it into administration. You want my honest opinion, I never bought that, because you would let the club go into administration and buy it out of administration. If you take on a club and you put it into administration, you then cease ownership of it and you have no control over buying it back. So I think that was, if I'm honest, a bit of a red herring. But what I would say is, Ray saved the club at a very difficult time. Otherwise, without him, it would definitely have gone into administration. And I think as a fan, Les, Ray has gone on record, hasn't he, talking about the premature dismissal of Craig Shaw. Personal view, I believe his single biggest mistake, and I've spoke to a lot of players to try to get to the bottom of this, was about retaining the services of Steve Cottrell. I am as convinced as I can be from speaking to a lot of people who were, playing, coaching in there. He could have kept Steve Cottrell. Would have cost him money, but when you look at, I think Ray said it cost him in total 10 million quid. North of that. Personally, I think if he kept Steve Cottrell, nucleus of that team, clearly you had to sell Cass because of the wages. I think Steve Cottrell would have got that club promoted again. And I think that was where it went wrong for him, the moment he didn't retain the services of Steve Cottrell.
I would agree with that 100%. He'd certainly got the guys set up wonderfully defensively. The goals in the team at every single match. Not for me, not a vast difference in the league above. I'm sure they would have held their own and probably pushed on to a possible playoff opportunity. When you looked at the team, Hughes, David, would those players have left and gone any higher? I don't think so, not at the time. So they would have kept the nucleus of that team. And under Steve Cottrell, I'm sure, they would have kicked on. Instead, that didn't happen, and Craig was brought in. For me, Craig should have had a senior experienced guy. Craig was new to the game. He'd done some managing work abroad, nothing in this country, and I think he needed somebody alongside him to help with the other issues, rather than coaching on the training ground and picking the team. That might have helped, and sort of that kicked in, and then another manager came in and out, and and
it cost a lot of money. Hiring and firing managers cost you a lot of money.
Absolutely. And probably, another big mistake I thought was getting rid of Sean Derry, who I thought had done a wonderful job in keeping the team up, and I thought we may kick on from there. But Guy Branson was brought in, and recruitment changed with getting loan players, young players from other clubs, and that worked badly for me. And I think that probably saw the start of us on a real big downhill. Yeah, really sad times. We've touched on the good ones and there's some bad ones to follow, isn't there?
Ben, we've spoke at length about Russell King as kind of like the puppeteer, pulling the strings on everybody else, although he was only ever a consultant, never held a full-time role, etc., etc., etc. That was kind of how he positioned himself. So when I was writing my book, he was incarcerated somewhere in Bahrain, and I think shortly after my book came out, I forget exactly which authority it was in Jersey. They managed to extradite him, and he was sentenced for various frauds to prison time. And I think until quite recently, we all thought he was still in prison. Don't want to give too much away, but clearly the number of people we've already had saying they've listened to everyone, so it will come out very quickly. So there's a bit of a finale to the show, isn't there? And well, you take up the story.
Yeah, well, I mean, when we started working on this, we were working on the basis that he was still in prison. That was what we believed as well. He'd, as you say, he'd been extradited to Jersey in 2018 to face fraud charges for a series of frauds he carried out in Jersey before he even embarked on the Munto era, if we can call it that. So this was in up to sort of mid-June, July 2008, the frauds that he carried out there. So it took detectives, good 10 years to catch up with him and get him back to Jersey. He pleaded guilty to a series of frauds and was jailed. And then I had a source that was able to help me out, and I discovered that he'd been released. So it was a case of tracking him down, which we were able to do. We were able to find him eventually after what was a sort of a long and rather complicated hunt for him. It involved various meetings and different things that I couldn't go into too many specifics. But we found him and found where he was living and went to see him, which was quite a bizarre and surreal experience, really, having spent so long investigating what he's been doing and having known about him for so long. Of course, as a Notts fan, it was very strange to be in a position to go and find him, and that's all in the podcast.
and we won't go into the conversation that you had with him. Is it fair to say he was surprised when you arrived?
I don't know if Russell King could ever be surprised about. I can only assume he exists in a sort of state of alertness, having had the career he's had. But yeah, I mean, we it took us a long time. We went to find him. I mean, I don't want to build it up too much. We didn't go out for tea and cakes with him or anything, but we were pleased to have been able to find him. We could put it that way.
Right. It's a great piece of investigative journalism. It's a great series of podcasts. So the link to how you can download these podcasts, access them, is on. For those of you watching on our YouTube channel, you can see the link. It's all there. To recap, so you can now, basically, it's a bit like Amazon and Netflix, Ben, yeah? You can binge watch, as some people have already done. Some of our flock have already been watching it. They spent most of today listening. I keep saying watching, it's terrible, it's a podcast, listening to it. So people can binge watch all 6, yeah? Or they can do one a day or whatever they want, yeah?
Yeah, they're all there on BBC Sounds. You can get all 6 in one go, and you can, like people like Briggsy have done, you can let one roll onto the other. That's please do. Yeah, so do have a listen if you get a chance, and let me know what you think. I'd be very grateful.
No, absolutely. Chris Jordan says, really great podcast series. Great work, Ben, and thanks. So that's another one that's watched them all. Keith Cook, another one, a great insight. Brilliant. Thank you all. Leslie, as we wrap up the show, we did have it badged down for a bit of a preview of Halifax. Right, a regulation, former pro. Let's have your insight. It was kind of a regulation 3 points, wasn't it, on Saturday? Efficient, job well done. Halifax are obviously in the playoffs like ourselves, and these are kind of those 6 point swing games, aren't they? We all know what happened at Halifax. 2-0 up, lose 3-2, and they only got 10 men. As a pro, do you use that as a motivation tomorrow if you're Ian? Or is it all about trusting the process and playing the way Notts County play?
I think as a pro, instead of going back to the 3-2 defeat, I go back a fortnight to the 2-1 victory. And starting the game with a number of fringe players against virtually a full Halifax team. And, to come away with a win, I think that should have given a great lift. And they will be looking forward, or should be looking forward, to tomorrow's game with a view to feeling very confident about a victory. We've been going well of late. Had a couple of games put off, but that was a good victory on Saturday. I thought maybe if we'd have we had a few more chances. I think we could have finished with a Barnett score, but it wasn't to be. But I'll settle for 2-0. I'll settle for 2-0 tomorrow night. So the lads are on a roll, and I feel that we are getting better with our attacking play. We need to get more ruthless in the last third, take more of the chances, and let's hope tomorrow night sees us do that.
Ben, you're based. You're not in Calverton anymore. You're based up in the northwest now. Is it a case of following from afar? Can you get your BBC colleague Charlie Slater's commentary via some dodgy channel or something, or is it geo-blocked or whatever?
Well, I mean, I know nobody really wants to be in the National League, but one of the advantages is you can listen to the BBC commentaries. You can. So ever since we've been relegated, I've been able to listen to all of them, which is sort of a minor upside amid the gloom. Yeah, I mean, I live in Preston, so quite a way away. And I have a young son who I've got a job on my hands to try and get him to support Notts. It's a bit of a tough job from all this way away. But yes, I'll definitely be listening tomorrow night. We've got Torquay away as in the diary. That's the next game I'm going to get to. We've got a family trip down there, weekend away, which is incidentally where Notts celebrated, if you remember, the end of that Munto season. Ray Trew and quite a few of the fans talk about how they sort of took over the town, after that final game. So maybe we'll be able to relive a bit of that.
I remember it well. I was down there. I remember staying with my lad in the same hotel as the Notts team. I remember that. Some old kind of Victorian hotel, Babacoon somewhere, I think it was. And I'm sure there will be no shortage of Notts fans in Torquay that weekend, Les. Are you building up the physical and mental strength to embark on an ACCO special bus weekend? I mean, because they're pretty full on, aren't they, Les? I mean, you leave on about Thursday and get back on the following Tuesday, don't you? Are you up for that?
No doubt. I did the Halifax trip on NACO's luxury tours, and I think probably I'll get another one in before the end of the season. But I shan't be travelling to Woking that way. Definitely not.
And just finally, Ben, with the show, loads and loads of people you spoke to. You spoke to a few of the ex-players as well for their, because you don't really mention them. You spoke to some of the former players and got their perspective on this whole circus, if you like.
Yeah. I mean, I spoke to a good number of players, and which was as a Notts fan, a great pleasure to do. And we ended up featuring Neil Bishop and Mike Edwards, obviously two real legends of that era. We took them back to Meadow Lane, so they took us on a tour of the ground and shared memories of that season and some fantastic anecdotes of life with Sven. I mean, they say what you picked up on at the start, that he was incredibly dedicated to the whole thing. He was there every training session, rain or shine. He'd go to every single game, but they also shared with us how much of a good time he liked in Nottingham. And Neil Bishop in particular remembers being in a Chinese restaurant in West Bridgford, and a couple of £100 bottles of wine land on front of him, and he was driving. They had a game in a few days' time, and there was Sven in the corner waving at him, and he sort of staggered out of this restaurant, barely able to walk a few hours later, and got a taxi home. So some fantastic anecdotes from them, both about the sort of sporting season, but also what a crazy time it was for them, and out on the town with Sven. It's amazing. So you have to pitch yourself. Remember, this is a former England manager who was out in West Bridgford, who's over in North Korea. It just doesn't happen, does it?
Well, it is great to be able to relive those times and get another insight and perspective into clearly one of the most eventful seasons in Notts County's long and illustrious history. So thank you, Ben, for joining us tonight. Thank you for pitching the podcast series to the BBC, and thank you for producing it and being the driving force behind it. The link is on the bottom of the visual, as you can see it. It will also be posted on the message board. And for those of you who are more lazy disposition, if you put $1 Trillion Conman podcast BBC, rest assured it will come up. So thank you very much indeed tonight, Ben. Leslie, thank you as always for your unique insight. Thank you for the usual on-time contribution of your cuckoo clock. Good to see that is going so well. When you come on a show, Les, and that cuckoo clock doesn't go off, we know we're in trouble. We know we're in trouble. And I do think it was quite funny. The cuckoo clock went off as soon as they heard the name John Armstrong-Holmes. That did tickle me a little bit. I might get into trouble for that, but I thought your cuckoo clock showed an immaculate sense of time. On that note, before I get taken off air, thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the game Tuesday. We will be back on Wednesday. And I mentioned for my lad as well, Harry, who is doing a 28-mile walk if he doesn't get lost, 54 if he does, walking from Meadow Lane to Chesterfield next Tuesday for our top of the table clash. We're raising funds in memory of Colin Slater for Lifeline, initiative close to your heart, Les. Also, all the funds will go to Lifeline in memory of Colin. If you can do a $5 or something on the Just Giving page on the link, that would be most appreciated. We're hoping to raise £500, all going into Lifeline in memory of Colin. Thank you very much indeed, everyone. We will see you all again on Wednesday. Take care for now. Bye-bye.